You are listening to the Women's Gut Health Podcast. I'm Molly, integrative functional dietitian, ex-chef, and gut health expert. If you're struggling with constipation, diarrhea, or bloating, I know exactly how you feel because I've had Crohn's disease for almost 30 years. Each week, we'll dive into symptoms, trends, recipes, and navigate the complex landscape of women's health together, all based on scientific evidence, but in a way that makes sense. Ready to understand your body? Good. Let's go. Welcome, Lara.
Hi, Molly. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Doing great.
Love to hear it. Love to hear it. Well, it's a beautiful fall day. And of course, I'm wondering what the best thing you ate this week is.
Oh my gosh. So we had tacos on probably Tuesday, and we had some leftover, like my boys really like the ground beef. And so we like flavor that and we put that in the tacos. And so I used that and the brown rice we had left over and the rest of the veggies that were in the fridge. And I made a really delicious like beef tortilla soup, which usually I do with chicken. But it was so
Hmm.
good, And I was like, I'm
Ooh.
just going to add we added some like pinto beans and some like roasted corn and some chilies and some red pepper. It was very nightshade heavy. For those that can't eat nightshades, I would not even think about this meal. But it was really good. Lots of delicious broth in there. Oh, it's great. I loved it. I mean, we're still eating it even now.
Oh, I love that. Perfect weather for soup.
Yes, I'm a soup fan.
So I made like this chicken stew. So sometimes I'll do rotisserie chicken. We have a rotisserie on our grill that we use like all the time.
Oh,
So
nice.
sometimes I'll make one or I'll buy one or I'll just kind of like cook in some broth, some chicken breasts and kind of shred them up.
Yes, that's my
But
favorite
then
way to
it's
eat breasts.
and then it's just like carrot, celery, onions, a bunch of fresh herbs and bone broth
Mmm,
and chicken. And
yum.
then we make biscuits.
Oh, yeah, that sounds
Really good.
great.
So good.
Oh man, yeah, breasts and biscuits. That's where it's at.
Agreed. For
That's
sure.
comfort food right there. Squishy
It
comfort
really
food.
is. It really is. You know the first like time it gets cold and you're just like chilled to the bone.
Yes, yes.
That's where I was at.
That just like warms you up
Okay.
to your soul.
It did. It did. And talk to me about the post that you saw that you want to talk about a little bit.
Well, it was the visual of this post that pulled me in. So maybe we could put it in the show notes or whatever, but it's
Oh
just
yeah.
this beautiful, like probably AI generated piece of art, but it's a body that is just made of what I think this person thought the fascia, like the connective tissue and the spaces in between everything kind of look like. And then they're going through these beautiful movements. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this? And then, of course, there's some letters that pops up that says the secret to releasing repressed trauma is, in your fascia. So, the movement or other types of therapies like acupuncture or massage or Reiki or anything that kind of like shifts your energy so that you're able to kind of connect better in with yourself and feel a little bit more of those and then release them was just really intriguing to me. And I thought, oh man, we were talking about this before we came on today, but when I think about the fascia and everything that kind of connects inside of our bodies, it's not something that we talk about a lot, right? Like we talk about our bones and our muscles and our organs and our brain and all those things and blood, but we don't really talk about like all the in betweens. And there was something that came out probably in, I want to say 2017 or 18, maybe even a little later. And it was they'd done a study that Western medicine was like, we discovered a new organ. I'm like, oh, great. What's this? And they're like, we're calling it the interstitials. And I was like, geez. Chinese medicine, we've known about that for like 5,000 years. It's called the quote unquote triple burner, meaning the upper, middle, and lower parts of the body where things that aren't blood or, connective tissue or, like tendons or bones or muscle or organs. It's where everything communicates, like, like a water passageway where you have the dirty water and the clean water and the drinkable water, like in a kingdom. Like that's where all that stuff flows through, like kind of the underbelly almost. And that's what we call the triple burner. And they were, maybe thinking that that's where cancer might metastasize or whatever, but essentially just this like deeper network of communication that not only helps facilitate, fluid and immunity and movement and whatnot, but now, according to this post, this is where our emotions are held. And I think that's really remarkable because it's something that we are probably very intuitively aware of, but not necessarily have the language to describe. I mean, people say, like, I hold my stress in my shoulders. That's very
Mhm.
clear. People understand that. That's super palpable. We live in a world where we're arched over at the computer all the time. That's very easy to understand. But, whether or not I hold my mother's, familial trauma in my hips, or, I always, my relationships in my shoulder, or whatever it is, we don't think about that often. But when you can find a way to move the fascia and really kind of start just checking in with your own body, you will be surprised what your body tells you and what you can hear. So I thought that was really interesting, and would love to encourage people to just move and breathe and see what comes up.
Oh, I love that. Now, the fascia is connective tissue, right?
It is. Yeah, the fascia is like that. Like okay, a great example of fascia to me is like your IT band, right? So like on the outside
Hmm.
of your leg where your I means ilio, like your iliac crest on your hip, and then T means tibia. So it's this long like sheath that holds in the like your leg from side to side. Otherwise your muscles would just kind of fall out the side. So this sheath like holds them in, and it's like a band of quote unquote fascia. So it's not necessarily muscle, it's not necessarily tendon, but it's a matrix of, a cellular structure that's flexible, but also really protective, and apparently has some communication abilities, which I think is pretty cool.
That is very cool. Oh, neat.
Yeah,
Okay,
go fascia.
go fascia. I think mine, the one that I would bring up is I just did a project for my doctorate program on parasites. Oh, that I have to send
Ooh,
you. I'll put that down
yes.
and send you. It was very interesting. I did intestinal parasites, so there's a lot that goes on with that. We can talk about that some other time, but this was a kind of like a step by step for a do it your own parasite cleanse by
Ooh,
someone called the Parasite Mama. And the
interesting.
Parasite Mama, she does seem to be informed to a degree. But what I wanted to, and like get out there and get it. I'm certainly encouraging that. But what I wanted to just kind of tell people about an at-home parasite cleanse, because it really got me thinking,
Yeah.
well, this is actually like a medical treatment that's being
Uh-huh.
recommended by someone who doesn't have a medical license of any kind. And
Mm-hmm.
so we want to think about that because there are some people who are selling these cleanses, like nurse practitioners or dietitians or acupuncturists.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of places sell kits or whatever that you can then kind of middleman to a customer or a client or a patient
Mm-hmm.
without really doing anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And so just the overarching thing like that I need to say is
Yeah.
that with parasites, so the herbs that kill them, so they're very hard to test for because they have to be shedding and it's got to be a certain cycle, and that cycle hopefully comes up in 3 consecutive days of stool samples, but doesn't always. So
Correct.
testing for them is not really going to help. However, and like good, you can barely get what for anything for IBS, right? So good luck going to the doctor and asking them to test you 3 days in a row for parasites.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you get your doctor to do that, let me know, and I'll recommend that doctor to everyone I know.
For everyone.
Um, because we've got our antibiotics that treat them, of course, but to get those antibiotics, you would need to test positive. And I've
Correct.
had patients test positive for parasites on stool samples before. And in the sample, on the report, like from LabCorp or Quest, it says, this parasite has not been proven to cause any problems anyway. So we don't necessarily even think that you should care about this, is in so many words what it says. And when
Yeah.
the patients ask their doctors say, yeah, no, or maybe they'll like begrudgingly do a little something, but it's not the forefront here in the United States. So then that leads people to seek out their own treatments. And I totally understand that process because I work with it every single day. And I work with people who have, had enough basically of being told that and do want to take control of their health. But these herbs have not been tested on humans. So we have almost no research that humans with confirmed intestinal parasites were given a protocol of her herb ABCD, this many milligrams for this many times a day for this long, and here's what happened. And here's what happened in the control group that got a pill, but it was just a placebo, so that, your mind doesn't change the results because obviously, anyway, it's just really animals and in a petri dish. Like, does this herb kill parasites in a dish? Yes. Does this herb kill parasites in mice, in horses, in sea bass, in, all kinds of things? Yes or no. But so be careful when you're taking advice from someone with no medical license to take a combination of herbs that have not been proven safety, efficacy, or dosing in humans. So that's
Mm.
end rant on that one.
Yeah, yes. Oh my gosh, I totally hear you on that. I can't tell you how many people you come across on the internet that are like, I had this and I went through this program, therefore I can lead you through it. And you're like, you
Yes,
have no discernment other than your own constitution, nor have you taken an oath that says the patient's safety is the
right.
number one thing. Like, sorry, that's not how it
Nor
works.
Right. Nor are you opening up their drainage pathways first, making sure they're pooping every day, making sure that, they're binding up what's dying in there, making sure that they re-inoculate. And so all of those things, what works for one person does not necessarily work for another, or we would have all the answers, right?
Right, right. That's very true. And part of what came up for me when you talked a little bit about the herbal piece is that we do know that herbs act in a certain manner, that some of them are warm and some of them are bitter and some of them are, acrid and some of them are sedative and some of them are antiparasitic and antifungal and antiviral. But in terms of how they're going to behave in each organism, yeah, you're right. I love that you use sea bass. That totally cracked me up for some reason. I don't know why I thought that was so funny, but you just never know how it's going to react. And having someone that can see how it's responding, especially with parasites, because die off is not a joke. When you have to kill
No.
an organism inside of you, it is a big deal, especially one that may have been robbing you of all the vital nutrients because they're hungry and they get priority, unfortunately, like they do. And it's not you're right. I love that. It's not smart to go about what Jane Schmuckatelli said about her parasitic journey and try it for yourself.
Because she is not, so maybe she's not been taught about human metabolism and the science of digestion and absorption. Maybe she doesn't understand the way that our kidneys and our liver need to eliminate these herbs. Maybe she's just selling you a product on a Shopify store. So she doesn't know if you
Mm,
have
mm,
a kind of type 2, stage 2
mm-hmm.
kidney disease where you should not be taking her. You know what I mean? Like all of the things. So
Yep.
if you would like to learn more about parasites and parasite cleanses, obviously you can follow me on Women's Gut Health, or you can kind of reach out because I think a certified functional medicine practitioner, not one who's a personal trainer, but
Mm-hmm.
one who actually works with the human body and the medical side of it can really help you. I mean, that's definitely a thing.
Yes, and has maybe been through it themselves and guided a handful of humans through it prior to just yourself.
And the oath is important
Oh,
because,
such a big
taking a
deal.
course on the internet does not a ethical practitioner make.
No, no.
Okay. So new format today. we are going to move on from our little fun icebreakers to the topic of the day, which is gluten and
Gluten.
gluten. Um, and we're going to try to not be too technical because we don't want to bore you and we want you to stick around and we want you to learn something that you understand, right?
Yes, for sure. And there's so much misinformation out there. So
Yeah,
much.
there is. So, first of all, what is gluten?
What is gluten? It's part of
It
it's
is.
part, yeah, go for it.
Oh, do you? No, you go for it.
Gluten is a part of the wheat molecule. If I remember correctly, it's the part on the outside that when you, like part of the shell part of it, like the next kind of layer in right on the outside in terms of like its location and where it is in like the grain itself. And it's a protein. It's made up of amino acids. You know,
The
most
protein is
humans were
called gliadin.
gliadin. And I think most humans that are born on this planet have the ability to be able to work with it. Honestly, like we're born with the ability to do it. There's a small percentage of us out there that are not, and a bigger, smaller percentage of us out there that are sensitive naturally. But for the most part, we don't like to villainize food here. Gluten is food.
It is, but why is gluten so highly villainized?
Oh man. Well, as you know, our running theme is like gluten, or everybody's body is so different, right?
Hmm.
For those that haven't been diagnosed with like celiac disease or gluten sensitivity, but have like underlying, maybe say autoimmunity or chronic gut issues, I think one of the most important things to remember is that gluten isn't necessarily all the same, right? So if someone who does have something underlying or some sort of autoimmunity, it might be affecting you in a way that it doesn't affect others. Gluten in the United States, I think I looked this up today and we used what's called red hard wheat, which I thought was interesting. I was like, what are we actually using here in the US? Like, I know the process it goes through, but what's it called? And it's called red hard wheat, is what we usually do. And it's not necessarily the same as what our ancestors used to eat. We did this really great job of putting it through this process, which I'll again try to not be too technical, but it's called deaminidation. And what it essentially does is it makes the gluten, quote unquote, more soluble in your body. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. Then I'll be able to absorb it better. Well, kind of. But what that does is it enables a few systems in your body to kind of engage when maybe they wouldn't be engaging before.
Hmm.
So, like for example, some of the when you change this form of gluten, it can kind of engage other tissues. So, for example, if it's running down through the digestive tract, and maybe your body, with like a celiac or an autoimmunity or just chronic gut issues, there might be, some what's the word we like to use without being too technical, like leaky gut or
Yep, leaky gut.
dysbiosis. Leaky gut is
Hmm.
fine.
Or
So
imbalance of gut bacteria.
yes, that small intestine has become uh, more permeable. Like you can imagine it a little bit like a cheesecloth. Like things are going through it in a way that they're not supposed to be. And gluten is one of those things that can slip right through. And what that does is it goes into the bloodstream, and then your immune system is like, huh, this is interesting. What's this funky little protein that got in here? And then it will mark it. Like it's like, hey, it engages part of the immune system that's like, hey, what is this? What's going on here? I got to mark this. And so it will mark it, and, for people with autoimmunity, this is a really slippery, pun intended, slope, because what that can mean is not only is your immune system already maybe highly engaged due to the fact that you have immune cells that think your tissues aren't your tissues, and so they're kind of attacking them. But then you're throwing in maybe this, throwing in this food that is food, but it's in a different form now. And your body's going, what the heck is this? And so it's marking that as something that is non-like. What is this? What is this? And then just to take it one step further, you see this research now that's talking about how the gluten or the gluten amino acid, like the profile of all those building blocks of protein that it is made out of, is very similar to some other tissues in our body. Really
including the
scary.
tissue of the thyroid.
Yes, ma'am. That's the biggest one that people talk about. Like people with, an under or overactive thyroid that haven't been diagnosed with the autoimmunity like Hashimoto's or something should, they suggest they avoid gluten like the plague because your thyroid tissue and the gluten tissue look just the same. Like, how's your immune system supposed to know the difference sometimes? It's highly sensitive and it's going to be smart. And it's also what I would say kind of flexible, right? Like, oh, this looks very similar. It might be a couple amino acids off, but we really don't want this to cause a disruption. So we're going to mark it. Like, that's actually a really cool mechanism that our body does. But when you go and introduce things that have been gone through this kind of deaminidation process, that can wreak a lot of havoc in a body that is already what let's just call inflamed or kind of fired up within that autoimmunity or long-term standing gut problems. I don't know.
So to break it down even further, no, that was great. To break it down even further, basically, gluten comes on the scene. And let's say your body is already having an autoimmune response to your thyroid. Then it says, oh, this gluten is just like your thyroid. It's bad too, and causes a worse reaction when you eat it.
Yes. Yeah.
Or vice versa, thyroid's on the line. Gluten comes in and starts causing, you know, leaky gut, starts causing some inflammation because it's being recognized as harmful.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in response to a harmful invader, we inflame around it so that it gets upset and leaves, basically. Um, and then the thyroid follows suit.
Yes. Yes. And you know what's really this to me is probably the biggest thing with gluten is when we see there's another tissue that gets affected by gluten. And guess what that one is, Molly?
I couldn't even begin.
The brain.
Yeah, I know.
And
It's
it's
crazy.
that that if the tissues in the gut and how they become permeable to certain things, like that's kind of how a lot of tissues in our body work, right? Like you have things moving through certain tissues like blood in the blood in order to communicate throughout the whole rest of the body. And the brain is one of those things. Certain parts of the brain you can't break the barrier, but certain parts you can, and those tissues aren't let's say, free from anything that can make your gut impermeable, right? And maybe we need a little sidebar of that. Like, do people really know what it is that makes your gut leaky? You know what I mean? Like,
So your gut, yes, your gut is held together by intestinal cells called epithelial cells. And they are stuck together like glue by something called tight junctions. That's the glue. Now, when something activates zonulin, which is a regulator of that, how they open and close, they come apart. Now they come apart a little anyway. They should always come apart a little because we want to let things in and let things out, like nutrients and vitamins and fat and protein and carbs. All of those things are kind of moving in and out of the membranes of the intestine so that they can get to your liver, so they can get to the rest of your body.
yes, the
But
communication pathway, everything. Yeah, so permeable. It's great.
it's supposed to be like that. And then on the inside of your intestines there are all these little finger-like things. Almost think of it like a dandelion with the white puff when it's seeded that you could blow on.
Yes, yes.
They
I
just
like to
wave
say
around
kind of
with the
like
wind.
an amoeba in the water too, you know.
And they're what is absorbing the vitamins and the nutrients from the food that you eat. And they're also what's excreting things like enzymes to help you digest those things so that it can get more of those vitamins. But when something comes along, like for example, candida, which is a very large molecule, it acts like you just put a bowling ball on top of that dandelion and flattens
Mm-hmm.
all of them out. And so we don't have as much, we don't have as many enzymes to digest. So we start to feel bloated. We start to feel uncomfortable. We trigger that protein that removes the glue, the tight junctions, or loosens them up and kind of melts it, right? Melts the glue so that those intestinal cells come apart. And then bigger things like poop and food can, not like actual poop, but like things that are going to become waste
Yeah.
versus
Yes.
things
Yeah.
that would not, um, can leak out. And because this mostly happens in the small intestine, and there is no
Hmm.
poop in the small intestine yet. It's just poop to be. So
Yeah.
toxins, something like gluten, comes out into our abdominal cavity, into the rest of our body, and our immune system says, this is an invader, causes inflammation, flags it as a bad guy, and then every time you eat that food again, that's where we start to develop those food sensitivities. Or every time, let's say mold does that. So every time you're in a really moldy building, you are way more stuffed up or way more uncomfortable or way more bloated than someone else would be who didn't have that flag for the mold. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yes, exactly. It's like your body is creating a fire, like you said, to chase away the invader. Also creating mucus. The other thing I would tag on to there too, I love your bowling ball analogy because it just like flattens out those, the little villi onto either side and they become really close buddies with each other. And also, I would add that, a lot of inflammation happens when you don't have free movement of those. Like they start to kind of
Mm-hmm.
just get like a clogged up river and everything
Right.
starts to kind of fester and everything's not
Yes.
able to kind of like freely move. And like you mentioned, you're not going to get that wave like intestinal movement that we love, and you're not going to get the ability for food to move through and the absorption and all of it. Yeah, that is. And also, they say that things like pharmaceuticals can be a part of what can create those bowling balls, we'll say. Stress has also been kind of pointed to in terms of something that can kind of cause leaky gut. I come from the cool school of thought, and I'd be interesting to hear what you think about this too, Molly, is that I really believe it's a recipe for each person. That there are certain things that are going to tip the scales for people. It's just what percentage of each of those things is your recipe that's going to tip it. So, for example, if you live a very stressful life and you happen to live next to the freeway and you have asthma and you're a single mom, that's a lot of energy going out and you don't get a lot of time to care for yourself, and you decided to go on a pizza eating binge. I mean, that could be enough, and you're on the birth control pill, let's say that, like,
Mm-hmm.
that could be enough to tip the scales for that small intestine to have a lot more bowling balls in it, or the ability for it to hold up its structure and flow freely becomes really thwarted. But I do think it's a different combination for everybody, which is why it's so important to pay attention to the messages that your body's giving you, like even simple stuff like constipation or headaches or thirst and mood changes and how your poop looks. All of that is so important to figure out what's working for you so you can kind of keep track of what's tipping the scales for you specifically.
Okay, absolutely. I like to say everybody has a cup. And so for one person, it's they can only eat so much dairy before they start to have diarrhea or bloating. And for another person to be a completely different food. But yeah, everybody has like a perfect storm that when it happens, that's like their kryptonite, essentially. But for a long time, modern medicine and like Western medicine really didn't like, they knew that leaky gut or intestinal permeability was a thing, but they didn't think that it caused anything really. They just thought that it was kind of like a secondary, let's say, structural thing. And so in this month's issue of Gastroenterology, so brand new study, November 2024, we've got conclusions. Basically, your gut barrier is compromised in patients with IBS and contribute to clinical manifestations. Meaning, yes, leaky gut is part of what's causing your symptoms, your IBS type symptoms: diarrhea,
Mm-hmm.
constipation, bloating, abdominal pain, and dissatisfaction with bowel movements.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. I love to
About
hear
time.
that. That's so good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
hopefully
thank
somebody
goodness.
reads this.
Yes. And also to kind of come full circle to the brain thing, you know, the tissues in the brain are very similar to that in the gut. Like they talk about that gut brain axis and so on. And
Mm-hmm.
this is kind of one of the things I wanted to talk about today. You know, how, you know, just in terms of kind of keeping in mind when you think about like, well, how does this affect me? What should I do about this? And
Yeah.
you know, I think a lot of people hear stories like this and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't want a fire in my gut and bowling balls landing everywhere. Like, I'm cutting gluten out. And it's like, well, okay. But also, because we live in a world where, you know, we are exposed to a lot of chemicals, the recipe for tipping the scales to leaky gut can oftentimes lead to that leaky brain, you know, foggy brain, you know, inability to recall words, like you can't concentrate as much, you just feel, you know, not quite like yourself in your ability to think clearly. And that can be a sign with no gastro in, you know, no gastro symptoms whatsoever, and you can have this leaky brain sort of thing going on. And so what they see is that they'll see lower levels of serotonin in people that have been eating high levels of gluten, because it does this molecular mimicry like we talked about. And you know, when things sneak into the bloodstream or when they're not supposed to be and we engage the immunity, that same thing can happen in the brain, and that the brain will think that there's, you know, the immune system thinks that the brain is a tissue that is non-like, because it also has very similar amino acid profile to like the thyroid or gluten. And so it's a little bit scary when you think about that. But, you know, if you're like, what am I supposed to do about this? You know, how do I get this out of my system? And one thing I just really wanted to say today is go slow. To me, it's like coming off of caffeine. Like, I do not ever recommend to just like instantly, unless you're like having enormous amounts of diarrhea or something, you know, really bad, and you're a celiac, of course, don't eat gluten. But if you're suspecting that you might be intolerant or you have some of these symptoms, I'm a huge fan of going slow. Like all of those other processes that you mentioned when we were talking about parasites before, I think it 100% applies in this gluten concept. So many systems need to be online and a go. They need to have like your liver, your kidneys, the rest of the digestion all needs to be able to handle the detoxification of gluten coming out of your body. So, especially if it's already a part of your brain, you're going to feel real depressed. You're going to feel real tired. You're going to be real thirsty. You're going to have weird poops. You're going to have headaches, that sort of thing. And I'm just a huge proponent of not stressing yourself out even more. So, I really wanted to say today, just go slow. Go slow if you're going to take it out. I don't know. What do you think about that, Molly?
Love it. Other things to consider. Number one, perimenopause also causes
Mm-hmm.
brain fog.
Mm-hmm.
So don't think that gluten is the only reason why you can't remember where you put your keys, because it may not be, you know? And if you don't have signs of inflammation, and if you don't have like all this other stuff, and you're just casually listening to this podcast and maybe you just feel bloated sometimes, or maybe, you know, you have diarrhea sometimes, you can always try to slowly kind of wean off some of the gluten like you're talking about, but making sure then that you've got options. Like if you're going to remove anything from your diet, then what we want you to remember is that you've got to put back other stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like when we look at the whole gastric cancer and colon cancer and how they're getting higher and higher, the rates of cancer.
Yes.
I mean, out of the 8 things that would attribute to diet with cancer incidence being increased, over, I think, 5 of them are insufficient intake. So, not eating enough whole grains, not eating enough fruits or vegetables or seafood. So, just remembering that, like, it's not always about what you take out. Sometimes it's about what
Mm-hmm.
you're not putting in.
Yes.
So, I just want you to really feel like, okay, where is it going to be easiest for me to start? Is it going to be easier
Mm-hmm.
for me to eat more anti-inflammatory fruits and vegetables? Or is it going to be easier for me to take out gluten and then substitute with rice and quinoa and fruits and
Mm-hmm.
vegetables and lean
Mm-hmm.
proteins? And I'm not a big snacker anyway, but I could eat popcorn or I could eat, nuts and seeds, but not, okay, well, every morning for breakfast I have a donut, so I'll have a gluten-free donut instead, and then I'll be magically cured, right? Because, I mean,
I mean, we all think it,
marketing
that
would
maybe
have
that's
us
the,
think,
wouldn't that be great? If we
yes,
could,
it
that'd be so
would.
great.
If everything that was gluten free and ultra processed was good for you, then we would all have a much easier job. But
Yes.
also,
Yes.
you know, then the world would be a healthier place, I guess, maybe. But the fact is that it's not. And
Mm-mm.
so I just think that, we really want to remember, and like, the best thing I ate today was biscuit. I mean, this week was biscuits. So
Mm-hmm.
I just, there's so much. There are so many things we can talk about. And so the last thing, but you made a great point, and I think you explained it very well. The last thing that I wanted to talk about was the fact that when we eat gluten and dairy, and to some extent, I think some other foods, but I don't know which ones, so we'll stop there. They sit on opioid receptors. So there's something called glucomorphins. There's a lot of different ones, but they're glucomorphins and casomorphins, which my husband pointed out, it's like queso dip. I did not get the joke at all. That's what a big of a nerd I
Oh, I
am. I
love
know.
your
I was like,
husband.
what do
Good
you
job.
mean?
Good job.
Because it's queso, C-A, like casein, the protein in dairy. So it's like
Hmm.
not spelled queso.
It's okay.
But anyway, so we've got glucomorphins and casomorphins, and they make us feel a similar feeling of, like you were saying, that serotonin, that bliss, that relaxation when we eat them. Adversely, we also experience a sort of withdrawal
Yeah.
when we are positive for many of these. So some people, there are all kinds of tests you can do if you really want to get crazy about it, but some people have quite an affinity for these opioid receptor based reactions to these two
Yes.
products. And those people are not going to feel very good when they stop eating the food. So that's why you're saying go slow, because you're
Yes.
literally withdrawing to an
Yes.
extent from a similar kind of process. Now, obviously, nothing at all compared to coming off drugs. But for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people, food is a drug. And I think it's worth mentioning that this is a very, very personal and very, very scary thing to
Mm-hmm.
talk about, because
Mm-hmm.
it's so easy. And now we're in this world where it's like, oh, I heard that and I know I should do it. So then you're in the grocery store and you're like, I'm going gluten free. That in that moment, you don't want to buy anything unhealthy. Well, now that includes gluten. And so we're here to tell you that no, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
include gluten. And there's a way to have a streamlined elimination diet of 3 weeks where you do kind of have these things happen, where you can test it, right? And you only have to test it for 3 weeks. But my recommendation is, don't make that decision in the grocery store. Don't,
No,
like,
no,
if you
that's
really
not a
want to
good, that's just
explore,
so much confusion standing right
oh
there.
my gosh.
No,
I mean,
you need support.
really?
You need support with
Yes.
that. Everybody needs support, even with something just as simple as being like, I'm going to cut out gluten. Like you think it's complicated, but not in our, or you think it's easy, but it's actually not in our world. If you know nothing about it and you're like, I'm just going to cut out gluten. Okay. I bet it will last a day. You're going to
Well,
feel
and
like shit and
also,
you
are
don't
you
know what
really
to eat.
eating it?
Yeah.
Because you're eating
Yes.
soy sauce still, and you're eating whatever else. Some mustard has wheat mustard gluten in it. There's like and vinegar, right?
Right.
Many
Yeah.
vinegars. So, like, if you're going to do it, we want you to do it right, and we want you to be able to feel supported. So, I am creating a course. So, by the time we publicize this podcast, the course will be out. That will take you through an elimination diet. So I'll update these show notes, or I will just put my regular old page in here, and you can check that out in the show notes, and it will have the link. But, like, remembering that even if you just watch some YouTube videos about elimination diets or about, whatever else it is, I think that it's important to know that this isn't supposed to be easy. Like changing your lifestyle in any way. Like I'm trying to get my 10,000 steps and I'm at 6,500 and I'm really upset because here on the East Coast it's 3:52 p.m. So
Mm-hmm.
now, it's like, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
maybe if you're listening to this podcast, you think, oh, it's easy for you, and I think I'm not alone when I say that I don't think it's easy for anybody. I think it's just about understanding, having the education so that you're doing it right, but also being uncomfortable. And if you're uncomfortable now, and you want to do something that makes you more comfortable. So for me, that's, just feeling stagnant, sitting at the chair all day. I hate it. I really wanted to do something for my health. Then I have to get uncomfortable to reach that goal. And there is a degree of discomfort involved in changing, and there's a degree of consistency involved as well.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. Supporting yourself with that positive feedback and accepting where you are and what sort of habits you need to change. And then being mindful that sometimes you need some hand holding. And that's really important. Someone that's been there, someone that's, I think anybody that's gluten free is going to come up against roadblocks all the time just because you've done it for, I mean, I've been gluten free for years and years and years. But that doesn't mean that it's easy. And I would say, I mean, I don't know about you, Molly, but I'm kind of like a 80-20-90-10 person, depending on what's kind of going on in my life with gluten. I don't have celiac. I don't have an autoimmunity that I'm aware of at this point in time. And so I, will indulge. My favorite thing to eat gluten with is mussels or clams. And you just
Mm,
like lap up that like white wine,
yes.
buttery, delicious sauce. Like I just refuse to not enjoy that. And because I know my body well enough, I'm able to, eat 80% of the time in a way that works for my body so that I can have zero guilt about enjoying something like that. And it actually makes me feel pretty good. And my body doesn't go through a withdrawal because I haven't necessarily been in a state where I've, made my opiate receptors, like we talked about, the feel goodness of those food, that system isn't totally worn down. So we become more tolerant. So there is some, some hope at the end of the rainbow for people that have a body that wheat just doesn't, or gluten just doesn't work in. That's a different
Hmm.
story. But there, you can enjoy those things if you give if you give your body time to heal without it and reintroduce it and find where your tolerance is. It doesn't have to be as complicated as it might seem as though it is. You just have to find what works for you.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yes.
I would say myself personally, I have an autoimmune disease, and I think it really is based on how I feel. But I know that generally my diet is more, I really like to cook. I make a lot of stuff from scratch. It's kind of like a hobby now. I used to be a professional chef for many, many years, and so was my husband. So in our house, there's not a ton of reliance on, because when I work from home, so I have a lot of luxuries in terms of that. So I don't rely as much on processed foods, and I think that naturally kind of cuts down gluten consumption. But
Mm-hmm.
I would say certainly once or twice a week, I'm eating something that has gluten, and it's not bothering me. But there
Yeah.
have been times in the past where I have had to cut it out for a year or more.
Yeah.
And, that's, I think, and I try to explain this to people, that's how you kind of get to where I am today, which is you go through phases and you see, okay, well, for this phase in life, I really want to bring down some of this inflammation. I want to figure out what's going on, or I'm doing some kind of restructuring of my gut microbiome, or I'm going through whatever it is that I'm going through, and I want to learn what my clients go through. All of those things have been true for me. So in all those
Mm-hmm.
times, there have been times where I've stopped eating gluten, and I think probably mostly it's that I am more kind of open to everything. But I do think that just overall, when I don't eat it, like I know if I drink a beer, immediately I'm stuffed up.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
It's
Well, it's
crazy.
also like yeasty and sugary and full of alcohol. Those are all very damp
Mm,
causing. But yes, there is
love
there's
it.
a bunch of gluten in there too. Yeah. That's so true. That's so true.
But then then becomes a question. Okay, well, is it worth it
Uh-huh.
to not feel well after I consume this thing, whatever it is?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, it's not, but then 1 time out of 10, it is. And that's fine, And I
Yeah.
think that when we look online and we see like never and don't and how could you and all of those things, it's like, all right, man, well, I'm trying to live my life. I got a bunch of stuff going on and I don't
Mm-hmm.
even have kids. So I can only imagine how much stuff someone with kids has going on. And that's how we kind of regulate what is true for us. You know,
Right.
you can be
Right.
healthy without being super restrictive, and you can learn a lot about your body from a small period, no more than 3 months, of being super restrictive. But you've got to bring those foods back to know, number one, did it help? Number two, I've got to feed my good gut bacteria with all this diversity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And like you were talking about, your ability to help people through this, I'm excited to see what your course is, and I think people would really enjoy that. Um, and I know that, your journey with IBS has been, well, it's long and it's lifelong and it will continue to be, but I love that you're expressing that, when you do pay attention to your body and go through these phases and chapters where you learn different pieces of what works for you and what doesn't, that there is that light at the end of the tunnel where you are enjoying food again. And one way I wanted to kind of maybe engage the listeners for myself and my story was mine is hemiplegic migraines. That's why I cut gluten out, is because I have these stroke like migraines that are gnarly. I mean, cutting out coffee, which is where Supercube came from, was also part of the picture, but gluten also is part of the picture. Um, and working my way through that has been, I don't want to be down for 48 hours with symptoms of a stroke. That doesn't feel fun at all. So finding that
Right.
tolerance for me, and I'm at a 80-20 place because I have gone through phases where I haven't eaten it for years and years and years, gave my body
Hmm.
time to heal and worked on the other aspects of it. So I guess, gut stuff, and then, gut and brain, to me, those are, I kind of want people to remember those today. The gut and the brain are both so important when it comes to thinking about gluten. I call it
Gluten.
gluten. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your story with us. And tell
Yeah.
everybody how they can find you.
So, if you'd like to work with me directly, I'm at Lala's Wellness on Instagram, just one word. And then, if you'd like to learn about our product based stuff, we're at Supercube Me on Instagram and supercube.club online. And if you're in Portland and you'd like to have some acupuncture and cupping and facial rejuvenation, microneedling, and things, I am at pdx-acupuncture.com.
You are all over the place.
You better look out.
All right. Well, thanks for coming. We'll see you next week.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you for being here today. We are Women's Gut Health on YouTube, Instagram, Pinterest, and TikTok. In the show notes, you'll find the recipe share drive, citations to evidence supporting this topic, and fun links we discussed today. See you next week.